All right, well, good afternoon, Club 17, and welcome to once again another virtual meeting. And today we're extremely excited to have Jim Koch be with us today, the founder of Sam Adams and the Boston Beer Company, and also a native Cincinnatian. So we're happy to have him come back and speak to us as well. So we're going to jump right into the program, and I'm going to start out by giving a brief bio of Jim, and then we'll get into a quick presentation and followed by some Q&A. So with that, let me introduce Jim. So Jim Koch is the founder and brewer of Samuel Adams and is passionate about brewing craft beer. And as a sixth generation brewer, beer runs in his blood, but the brewing business was bleak when Jim started his brewery. He attended Harvard and earned an undergraduate degree and an advanced degree in business and law. He also taught adventure skills for Outward Bound and then worked for the Boston Consulting Group, where he counseled corporations and also learned from them. But in 1984, Jim decided to pursue his dream. Following family tradition, he brewed his great-great-grandfather's lager recipe. Brewing the first batch in his kitchen, he named the beer Samuel Adams Boston Lager. Unbeknownst to Jim, Samuel Adams Boston Lager became soon a catalyst for the entire American craft beer revolution, which I'm happy about, Jim. Thank you.
Cheers.
Jim relentlessly focuses on brewing the best beer, the best craft beer possible with an obsessive eye on quality and flavor. In looking to push the brewing envelope, he pioneered the extreme beer movement, challenging drinkers' perception of beer with complex barrel-aged brews like Samuel Adams Triple Bock and Utopia is a beer of great unprecedented flavor and alcohol content. And drawing upon his struggles in starting Samuel Adams, with little advice and no access to loan, Jim created the Samuel Adams Brewing, the American Dream program to help food and beverage small business owners and craft brewers gain access to capital, mentoring, and networks to help them succeed. And over the past 34 years, Samuel Adams has become one of America's largest craft breweries, but still only accounts for just 1% of the beer market. And brewing over 60 various distinctive styles of Sam Adams beers, Jim exudes the same care and passion when he brewed his first batch of Samuel Adams Boston Lager. So he's also a best-selling author, writing the book, Quench Your Own Thirst, Business Lessons Learned Over a Beer or Two. So thanks, Jim, for being with us. It's an honor and pleasure to have you here.
Well, thank you for that introduction. It's always a wonderful thing to get hyped in your hometown. So I hope my brother and sister are listening. It'll raise my status in the family, Dave. So I appreciate that. Nothing better.
Absolutely. We'll have to make sure that I talk to both of them.
Thank you. And
well, let's
go ahead.
Let's start out with a little bit of. I know you've over the years, you've learned a lot, through your entrepreneurial life after you started your organization. But maybe let's start off with four or five different lessons that you've learned over the years, and then we'll actually go into some Q&A as well.
Perfect. Because one of the things I've learned over the years is that I'm really boring when I'm not drinking. So if it's all right with everybody, I'm going to do this with a beer because I'm much more interesting. And I did write down a few lessons that I learned from, starting Sam Adams. It's been 36 years since the very beginning. And I'll start with kind of a lesson that I learned in coming up with the idea for Sam Adams. Because when I started Sam Adams, the brewing landscape was not very promising. In fact, my dad was a brewmaster. He got out of brewmaster school in 1948, and he worked for like 4 or 5 different breweries. They all went bankrupt. And when he got out of brewmaster school, there were a little under 1,000 breweries in the United States. When I started Sam Adams in 1984, that 1,000 had dwindled down to about 50. So almost 95% of the breweries that existed went out of business. That was not a promising industry to enter. breweries were closing. They were not opening. But I ended up starting Sam Adams and picking that because I thought about lots of different opportunities. Um, I'd looked at things in technology, healthcare, but they just weren't that exciting to me. They were more promising financially, but they weren't something that I really felt strongly about. And beer was, as you mentioned, in my blood, about a 0.05, so it's perfectly legal. Uh, and I ended up picking beer rather than things that people thought were much more worthy of investment, had much higher upside. And my original business plan, which is very embarrassing now, because I was at BCG, I charged people a lot of money for advice, and then I do my own business plan, and it was horribly wrong. Luckily, it was wrong in the right direction, but my business plan, and I had some of my own savings, and I raised $140,000 to start Sam Adams. My business plan was that in 5 years, I would grow to be a little over $1 million in sales. That would be 5,000 barrels, and we'd employ 8 people, and it would level out after that. And I'd be able to pay myself between $75,000 and $100,000 a year, and that was, what I needed to live on and meet my expenses. So I thought, okay, I'm not going to go into tech or healthcare. Those things would make me rich, but this would make me happy. And so my first lesson, if you're going to start a business, pick one that's going to make you happy, because the chances that you're actually going to get rich out of it are really, really, really small. But if you pick the right business, the chances that you're going to be happy can be quite good. And at the end of the day, unless you're some kind of weird sociopath, wouldn't you rather be happy than rich? So that was my first lesson. My second was sort of product strategy, if you will, which was very simple. And I learned this I did learn as a consultant. Companies would come to me with business ideas, and at first I'd do like really complicated analysis, conjoint analysis, price volume trade-offs on semi-log paper and stuff like that. But after a while, I figured out that it really boils down to, you have a viable business only under one of two circumstances. Your product has to be genuinely better, or it's got to be cheaper. And if what you're offering the consumer is not better than the things they currently have, or cheaper than the current things they currently have, you are not adding any value, and you don't deserve to exist. And I was very fortunate because Sam Adams, my product, was actually both. Because my competition when I started was not Bud and Miller and Coors and Shaneling and Hudapole and Wiedemann's and all the mass domestic beers. My competition was for the drinker who wanted something better than that. And at that time, they couldn't get great fresh beer in America. They had to drink imports. And if you know anything about beer, beer is liquid bread. It has a limited shelf life. It's good for sort of 4 or 5 months, roughly. I mean, there's some exceptions, but that's a very applicable rule of thumb. And the imports were not fresh. They had these long supply chains. They didn't really take care of moving product through, rotating, and so forth. So they were often stale. And then there's a weird thing about beer, and it comes from the chemical composition of hops. Hops have a compound which is affected by light. Brewers call it light struck. And when it gets light struck, it turns skunky. It actually sort of smells like a skunk. And I'll bet a lot of you have had skunky beer. That was light struck beer. That was in green and clear bottles, because those are a marketing creation. They look, really appealing, really clean and pure. but they ruin the beer. The beer gets skunky. That's why, like Corona, you have to put a lime in it because the lime covers up the skunky taste. So my idea was, and the sort of the key insight for the whole business was, wait a minute, I can make a beer that is better than anything on the market. As an American brewer, I knew there wasn't like some magic to making beer in Germany or Belgium or some other place. It all comes down to the quality of ingredients and the skill of the brewer. And I knew I could make great beer here in the United States and give it to people fresh. And that was an experience that American beer drinkers had not had. And that was the fundamental insight that led to the whole craft beer revolution, which today encompasses almost 10,000 breweries here in the United States, more than any other country. And to me, as an American brewer, it has been like super, super cool. Because when I started Sam Adams, American beer was a joke. The rest of the world laughed at our beer. It's 35 years later. Today, small craft brewers like Sam Adams are teaching the rest of the world to make beer. German brewers are coming to the United States regularly to learn how to make beer from us. Today, the best beer in the world, hands down, no question, is made here in the United States, not anywhere else. And it's this wonderful story of American innovation that bubbled up from semi-crazies, from misfits, not from, the mainstream companies, guys in their garages, just like, we created the computer industry with guys in their garages. Same thing happened in beer. And we have totally reversed the respect of American beer. The third thing that was very important to my success was the sort of talent strategy, if you will, but it started with my first hire. And, I was at this high-powered consulting firm, had, the best and the brightest from the top business schools. Some amazing people went through there. Some of you would know, like Mitt Romney or Benjamin Netanyahu was there. Clayton Christensen, the business writer, was my office mate for a while. So it was really a great talent pool. And my dad had started a business after he got out of brewing. Started here in Cincinnati. He understood, chemistry and chemicals, and started a chemical distribution business with a partner. And he and his partner had a great relationship. His partner still lives over in Northern Kentucky today. And he said, it's really nice to have a partner. And don't pick somebody like you. Pick somebody with complementary skills that you get along with, but is extremely talented. So I looked around at BCG, and they were all like me. And I wonder who I want as a partner. And then I realized, wait a minute, I think I know. I picked a woman named Rhonda Kalman. At first, she didn't want to leave BCG because it was a good job by her standards. And it took me 6 months to convince her to take a chance. And Rhonda went on to be the other half of Boston Beer Company. She built our sales force. She had 200 people working for her when she left to start her own brewery. And Rhonda had totally different characteristics than me. I have these Harvard degrees. Rhonda was 23 years old. She never went to college. She was my secretary. But and America has kind of a caste system based on education. Rhonda subsequently proved how talented and capable she was in the success of Boston Beer Company. But because she didn't even have a college degree, she could never really be much more than a secretary at BCG. Well, she joined me, and she is a big part of the success of the company. So I learned, talent comes in all kinds of packages. And if you can teach yourself to recognize that, you can access talent pools that are overlooked by the standard metrics and measurements and find really superb people. So that was the third thing I learned. The fourth thing I learned, sort of against my will, was from my uncle. He was actually my mother's cousin, but we call him uncle. He's from Cincinnati. Um, his family business was Main Supply, which sold hardware supplies before Home Depot. And he was the younger brother, so his older brother got the business. His name was Jim Couch. There's a Jim Couch building at the University of Cincinnati, and he was, headed a couple of their campaigns. And he decided if he couldn't go in the hardware business, he would go to business school. Long story short, ended up at Goldman Sachs as a salesman and worked his way up all the way to the management committee back in the late 80s. As a salesman. And we are all, particularly hyper educated people like me, we look down on selling. Salesmen, it's kind of like, ooh, you have gravy on their tie and they talk fast. And, I read about them in Willie Loman or Glengarry Glen Ross, those kind of used car salesmen. Those are all bad things. What he taught me is the opposite. He said, selling is good. And by the way, Jim, you have all this beer that you've made. What are you going to do with it? And I said, well, I'm setting up the business. He said, no. Forget about setting up the business. I've seen a lot of businesses. What are you going to do? Go out and buy a computer. Okay. Well, let me tell you, Jim, I've seen a lot of businesses that went broke. And guess what? They all had plenty of computers. So forget about that. What they didn't have was enough sales. So go out and start selling. And I'd never sold anything in my life. I had to go into bars, make cold calls, wait. People would stand me up. I mean, I didn't go to Harvard to go sell beer. I mean, you sell beer, you don't even walk in the front. You walk in the back. Well, the back of a bar or restaurant, the floors are greasy. Nobody speaks English. It's not a crazy, but he told me you got to start selling, get one account a day, and work till 11 o'clock in the evening. If you haven't gotten that account, if you get one early, you can maybe try to get another, but you've had a good day. And I worked that out, and in my business plan, it was true. I needed 250 accounts. I thought, oh, if I get one a day for a year, I made it. So I had to learn to sell, and it was scary. I had to. I mean, the way I learned to sell was the way any overeducated person does. I went out and bought a book, Tom Hopkins, Mastering the Art of Selling. And it's like cheesy polyester guy on the front, but I actually committed to getting good at selling, and it was very rewarding. What I learned is it is a very honorable activity. Selling done effectively is basically figuring out what you have to offer will help the customer accomplish their objectives. It has nothing to do with your objectives. It's figuring out how what you're offering will help them accomplish their objectives. And that's a very noble process because you're adding value. And it ultimately is very satisfying. I mean, to me, you get to interact with all kinds of people that you may not, normally see. This is a true story. Yesterday, I mean, I still do selling and go out and call on accounts. Yesterday, I was up in New Hampshire, literally calling on, liquor stores and bars and restaurants. My first call, they were very excited to see me. It was a little, we call them package stores. It'd be like an old Pony Keg was in Cincinnati. And it was owned by an Indian couple, immigrants, super hardworking, great people. And the owner's wife had actually made me breakfast that morning. She was a pharmacist. She worked till 11 o'clock at night, got up early to make me genuine Indian food with homemade mango sauce. I mean, that's you never get that. So it's and you know, you get to see all kinds of people, and it in these times that we're experiencing now, it's very enlightening, because people that, you know, get looked down on are your customers, and you see, you know, how hard they work. You see, you know, what their life is like, and more than that, you have to sell to them. They can, you know, turn you down. You know, your ego is in their hands. So it, to me, you know, and when you call on package stores, liquor stores, you get everybody. You get bulletproofs in West Baltimore, where you have to slide the money in like an old time bank. You know, you get in LA, you get a lot of Chaldeans. If you ever went, you know, read the Bible, wonder where the Chaldeans went. Those were Iraqi Christians. There's a whole lot of them in LA running little package stores. So you see this wonderful mosaic of America. And I guess my last thing I learned was from Outward Bound. Actually, I used to be a mountaineering instructor, and I learned the difference between scary and dangerous. There are things in life that are scary, and then there are things in life that are dangerous. And we tend to, you know, work very hard to avoid the things that are scary, but not so hard to avoid the things that are genuinely dangerous. I'll give you you know, a mountaineering climbing analogy. Like, you know, you see people doing rock climbing on those ropes, and it looks, you know, like Spider-Man-y, and looks really, you know, scary. And it is kind of scary. You know, I used to, at Outward Bound, I used to teach people to rappel, which is kind of coming down on the rope. You're basically walking off a cliff backwards. So I had to get people to literally walk off a cliff backwards. But, you know, they were roped. That rope would hold a small car. It was not the least bit dangerous, but it was scary. Now, on the other hand, let's say you're on a big mountain. It's a really nice day, you know, early June, this time of year, nice sunny day. You're walking across a 30-degree snow slope. That, you know, beautiful. That's really dangerous, because, you know, the top layer of the snow is melting, water is coming down. At some point, it's going to hit a layer of that snow where during the winter there was a lot of sunshine. The surface got a icy crust, and then you got new snow that fell on that, and more new snow, and under there is that icy crust with soft snow on top of it. The water hits it. That's what causes an avalanche. So that's not scary, but dangerous. And our lives are like that. When I think about starting Sam Adams, I left a good job. My dad thought I was crazy. He didn't want me to do it. But it wasn't the job I really wanted. And everybody thought I was really taking all this risk, and I wasn't, because what I was doing was scary. You know, leaving a good job, a salary, healthcare, career path, all that stuff. That seemed scary. But the alternative was staying in a job that wasn't what I genuinely wanted to do, and getting to be 65 years old and looking back and going, oh my gosh, I wasted my life. That's dangerous. So it's important to separate the scary from the dangerous, and embrace the scary and avoid the dangerous. Cheers.
Well, thanks so much for those life lessons, and the way you described them was very captivating. There's no doubt about that. Let's shift a little bit and talk about some of the things that you were involved with at the very beginning, and maybe a little bit about running the organization now. and then maybe we'll close with some thoughts about Cincinnati, since you're a native.
Love it.
So let's start from ground zero. When you were brewing that first batch of Boston Lager, I mean, how did you name the beer? I mean, you could have named it a variety of different things, and obviously the name is a household name for us all right now. But how did you go through that process?
Well, I'll tell you the story. You know, again, I sort of started with nothing, so I didn't really have a lot of help. And as I was, getting the idea and so forth for the company, I was still working at BCG, so I would keep these lists. Names would kind of pop in my head, and I had a list of 200 of them, and I kind of winnowed it down to like I think 6, and I had a designer make up designs of them. The 6, I'm trying to think. The others were New World, which came in second, Liberty Tree, Golden Oak. Some friends who worked in an ad agency, they actually spent some time and came up with their suggestion, which was horrible. They wanted me to name it Sacred Cod, which is the symbol of Massachusetts from the 1600s. So that one didn't go very far. I took this 6-pack of labels to bars. My wife was divorcing me. I didn't really have anything better to do at night. And so I would ask them and show them, and they'd give me comments. I winnowed it down to the last 2, which were Sam Adams and New World. And New World was the first clipper ship ever built. It was built in Boston Harbor. And so the design had this, very graceful clipper ship cutting across the label with its sails full of wind. And I had to figure out which one. And I was still traveling. So this was my consumer survey. I'd be on airplanes. And I'd ask the flight attendant, I tell him I'm starting a new beer. I haven't named it. Actually, it's down to 2 names. Here they are, Sam Adams, what do you think? I get there. And do you mind if I, talk to some of the people on the plane? I won't interrupt anybody, but people look bored and say, oh, no, go ahead. So I ended up with 1,000 data points. They were about evenly split. And it came down to those 2. I picked Sam Adams because he was a forgotten figure at the time. I mean, nobody knew who Sam Adams was until he became a beer. But in his day, he was the more famous of the 2 Adams. He was more famous than John Adams. Sam Adams, as a historical figure, was the revolutionary behind the American Revolution. He was a radical, a firebrand, a troublemaker, a propagandist, and a brewer. And that's, it takes at least those 4, maybe 5, to start a revolution worth starting. And he'd sort of been forgotten, and he was just a very compelling historical figure. And without him, I mean, we might still, be watching cricket matches instead of the Reds, and singing God Save the Queen, and working on the 4th of July instead of drinking beer. So he deserved a beer.
Well, I think you made a wise choice, without a doubt. So, well, let's kind of fast forward to running the organization and what you've done over the years. But one question I have, and as I mentioned in the introduction, you've had many different brands of Sam Adams, flavors, and that type of thing. But what role do you play in actually tasting and approving new brews?
I am still intimately involved with that. I guess it's 36 years in. I realized pretty early that I had some skills, but being a good manager was not one of them. I'm disorganized. I don't follow up on things. I have some people have accused me of having the attention span of a gerbil. They might be right. Rhonda, having been a secretary, was very organized. She would write stuff down. She would follow up. So I guess I learned very early that, a company doesn't have to have all of the capabilities in one human being, but it needs to have them all in the organization. So um, it's been really 30 years since I've really been actually, running things at the sort of managerial type level. I've been doing my best. And I feel like when people ask me, well, and I haven't been CEO, I was a CEO for 16 years. But for the last 20, I've had a CEO first, only two of them in all that history. And people ask me, well, you're a CEO, you got full, what do you do, Jim? And basically, I view my role as two things. I am responsible for the quality of the product and the culture of the company. And I genuinely believe that we have been successful because we have great products that people choose to drink when there are many alternatives out there. And we have a company whose culture, you know, is never got bureaucratic, that has been very innovative, and that has always been focused on, the key things like making great beer and working our butts off to sell it. So I'm still very involved in tasting. I've actually got some samples in my refrigerator that we're working on a new brewing technique. I liked it, but sometimes when you do a new brewing technique, you got to like take it home to mama and live with it. So I've got a case of beer A and beer B, and I'm going to spend this week drinking them and trying to figure out, is this a change that I want to make? Because it's actually a change to Sam Adams Boston Lager. Over the years, we've looked for opportunities to make it better. It's a better beer, noticeably better beer than it was when I started.
Well, if you need an assistant to help you with that project, you know where to find
All
me.
right. Well, I'm on my
So,
second liver. I could use some company.
well, tell us a little bit about how you've diversified the company as well, because now you're into various other brands like Twisted Tea and Angry Orchard and some other ones, and complementing the beer as well. So, what drove you to get involved in some of those
That's a good
diversification
question.
areas?
I've always believed that it's very hard to draw lines around innovation and creativity. They all come from sort of a restless dissatisfaction with the status quo. And, Boston Beer Company, one of our, you know, things we remind ourselves of is the status quo sucks. The only reason the status quo exists is because we have not yet figured out how to improve it. But the status quo sucks. And so we've, pushed boundaries of what beer can be. And there's some of the things that you're alluding to, which are now the majority of the company's sales, and how we've been able to, have a double-digit growth in a declining industry is innovating new categories, new beverages, or bringing back something overlooked. So, I started with Sam Adams Boston Lager. That was our mainstay. 30 years ago, we invented the idea of seasonal beers and created a seasonal program of 4 different beers that we rotate every year, sometimes bring new ones in. Then, things like Sam Adams Utopia, as you alluded to it. It's a lunatic fringe of brewing. It was the first extreme beer. It weighs in at about 60 proof. It was illegal in Ohio until 4 years ago, and it's still illegal in 13 states. It doesn't taste like any beer you've even imagined. It's in between cognac and port and fine sherry. It sells for over $200 a bottle. and we sell every bottle we make. We have to, ration it. And I think actually Kroger had a lottery for I think the 15 bottles they got when it was the ban was lifted and it was finally legal, because Ohio they want to have all the high proof stuff through the state stores. God love them, and we found a way around that. And then like 25 years ago, we started thinking about other beverages that we could create. And we have breweries and kettles, and so we came up with Twisted Tea, which was built on some of the things we learned when we were able to acquire the Shaneling Brewery. We are actually the largest craft brewer in Ohio because of our brewery that we've had in Cincinnati since 1996, I think. And with that came some capabilities to make tea. The Lichtendahl family, the previous owners, were making Trade Winds tea. I mean, what can you make in a brewery? I mean, you got big kettles. You can make tea. And they developed a clear alcoholic base. We improved on it, put some fancy ion separation equipment and microfiltration and nanofiltration and stuff like that, and came up with a hard tea, which is called Twisted Tea. It's grown double digits for 20 years now. It's bigger than any other craft brewer, very successful. 20 years ago, we came up with hard cider. Hard cider was the largest alcoholic beverage in the United States until beer, until the German immigrants brought beer to this country. And of course, obviously, to Cincinnati, hard cider was our primary form of alcoholic beverage. Another Ohioan, William Henry Harrison, Tippecanoe, if you look at his campaign posters, he had his leg up on a barrel. That was a barrel of hard cider, which proved he was a man of the people. So now that's developed into Angry Orchard. It's revived cider making in the United States. And then 4 years ago, we were tinkering around with the idea of a hard seltzer. And we came out with Truly Hard Seltzer, which is now actually, that whole category is the fastest growing category in alcohol. So I guess, like I said, I may have a short attention span, but I'm always sort of scanning the horizon for opportunities that other people don't see. And I think that's been part of our culture, and maintaining that as we grow and become a bigger and bigger company is very hard work, but it's essential to our future.
Very good. I think we've got time for a couple more questions before we have to part ways, but let's kind of shift gears towards Cincinnati, where it began for you and where you spent a lot of time here. And just in general, obviously you mentioned buying the Hudapole Shaneling Brewery several years ago, but you were here many years before that. But how do you compare and contrast the city that you grew up in with the city that exists today?
Cincinnati has gone through some transitions. I grew up here, went to school here until I went off to college. So, and I lived in short periods intermittently. So I left in 1967. And this will probably be surprising to people, but I left Cincinnati and went to Boston. And Cincinnati, 50 years ago, was a noticeably more prosperous, wealthier, and better off place than Boston. Boston was kind of run down, kind of blue collar. Cincinnati had a very diversified economy, a lot of wonderful, benefactor families that, endowed, cultural institutions that were, much higher quality than you might expect in a city of Cincinnati's time. And back then, actually, we had baseball and professional basketball, and we're just about, to get the Bengals, but the Royals left town, and we don't have all three sports, unfortunately. But over the next 50 years, there's been a shift, and Boston's become extremely wealthy, and Cincinnati has been, stable. As I guess Mark Twain said, if you think the world's going to end, why don't you go to Cincinnati, because it'll happen a few years later. And so, I do believe, and we're very committed to Cincinnati. I do believe Cincinnati has a very bright future. It is a very appealing city. When we move people there, they don't want to leave. It is a great place to grow up. I am who I am because I was fortunate enough to grow up in Cincinnati. David McCullough, the great American historian, when he wrote about the Wright brothers, said the key to a happy and successful life is to pick good parents and be born in Ohio. And I feel like I'm the beneficiary of that. I think Cincinnati now, is coming out of a 50-year slumber. There's great political leadership. There's always been sort of at the national level, great political leadership. It had that funny city manager structure, then mayor, where they didn't have a lot of power, but I think that's changed. I think Mayor Cranley has a lot of vision, and is doing good things. And over the Rhine, that area will continue to develop. Cincinnati's going to be very attractive to live downtown. Everybody's wondering when's the next Mount Adams going to happen. And it took 50 years for the next Mount Adams to show up. But it's, now Cincinnati has a vibrant nightlife in town, and people, they don't necessarily want to live out in the suburbs. They want to come into town. I think that's great. So all we need is either the Bengals or the Reds to actually, start winning again. It's been 1991, 92 with Barry Larkin and Jose Ruiz when we last went wire to wire and won the World Series. Got to happen sooner or later.
The cycle has to change, so we're looking forward to that. Well, Jim, I can't tell you how thankful we are as a club to have you speak to us. Your history and your journey have been spectacular. Learned a lot just in the short time that we've spent together today. And so I want to thank you so much. I know that you're busy. I love the stories about still selling. Yesterday your activity, and because it never stops. You continue to have to build the company and make sure that it's steered in the right direction. So I love that. But I think from our angle, from a Rotary International perspective, we've continued to provide service to the community and as well as globally. And one of the main things that we're trying to accomplish as Rotary International is to eradicate polio. And it hasn't been here in the States for a long period of time, but it's still in other parts of the world. But there's only a few cases that are new this year in places like Afghanistan and Pakistan. And the reason I'm telling you all this is that we're going to be making a donation in your honor today to the End Polio Now campaign for Rotary International to try to eradicate polio, hopefully in the next couple of years, because it's been a decades-long process to be able to do that. So we can't be more thankful to have you here today.
Oh, I'm honored. I'm old enough to remember growing up before there was the vaccines, the Salk and the Sabin vaccine. It was terrifying. You couldn't drink from drinking fountains in the summer. You were scared to go to Eden Park. What you're doing is amazing. And, as somebody who remembers, what it was like to live in a world where polio was around, well, I'm really honored to be able to have a beer with you. So thank you for all the good that you do.
Well, thanks so much. And I'll put the offer out there that's open at any point in time. I know you do get back to Cincinnati occasionally, so we meet every Thursday at noon at the Hilton downtown. So feel free to join us at any point in time. We'd love to shake your hand.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. All right, everyone. Well, I'm going to conclude our meeting with just a few internal things and a few announcements. So I guess first of all, we've got a fun event coming up Thursday night at 7 o'clock, and you just received an email from Kirsty, and it's also been posted on Facebook as well. But we're going to have a Rotary virtual trivia night. I mentioned this last week, but it's going to start at 7 o'clock, and we're going to have a variety of different questions that are going to range from sports to arts and literature to food, and also Club 17 trivia. So there's, in the email that Christy sent out, there's a link that you need to log on and actually download an app to be able to play, but it'll be a fun event that we'll be able to showcase our talents, and maybe even there'll be a Sam Adams drink while we're doing that. Who knows? Next up, I want to reiterate that most of you have seen the email that I sent out last Friday that will restart our meetings in person. And again, next week on June 18th, we'll be back in the Hall of Mirrors in a very, very safe way. And I want to emphasize that first and foremost, the well-being and the safety of our members is our top priority. And we're going to be making a variety of different changes that will keep everybody at safe distances and make sure that we're following all the guidelines that have been put before us, before the state and the health department. We've actually created a video. Linda and I created a video that kind of describes our reopening process, and I included that in my Next Level newsletter that I'd sent out. But we'll also post that on our YouTube channel, and we'll also send that out as a email to each club member as well, so you can better understand what it is that we're going to be doing to make sure that we provide a safe environment. A couple things, membership announcements from members in the news. Friday, June 12th is a huge day for one of our members. Bob and Joyce McElroy are going to be celebrating, believe it or not, their 50th wedding anniversary. So congrats on a huge milestone, Bob and Joyce, and we look forward to seeing you here soon. And I'd also like to ask everyone to keep Rotarian Mary Brandstetter in your thoughts and prayers, as unfortunately yesterday her father passed away from being diagnosed recently with gallbladder cancer. So keep Mary in your thoughts and prayers. And lastly, Judy James lost her mother on May the 9th. So also keep Judy and her family in your thoughts and prayers. And one last announcement is just to reiterate, we're going to be selecting our directors and officers here coming up soon. And I'd like to remind everybody who's interested or who wants to nominate somebody to serve as a director or as an officer to please send me the nomination form that I'd emailed out, and I'll send out a reminder email to this as well, but we need that to be sent back to me by July the 3rd. So looking forward to working through that process and formulating the new leaders for our club coming up. All right, well, next week we're going to be meeting, as I mentioned, back in the Hall of Mirrors, but the following week you'll have the pleasure of having soon-to-be President Brett LaBarre be in front of you for the first time, and he's going to take over the meeting on June the 25th. And so we're looking forward to seeing him take over his presidency here in the next few weeks. So looking forward to seeing you next week, and with that, meeting adjourned.